welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this is take 2 of doing this episode. I actually recorded this episode a couple of weeks ago, and I hated it. I just felt like it was the worst episode I ever recorded. I was just not able to concentrate. I was just all over the place, even more so than I probably normally am. And even the cat is walking out of the room right now. The cat has no faith in me at this point in the show. I don't know. I just had a lot going on and just didn't feel like it was going to be the best episode. Not like this show has a high production quality anyway, but it was still, I don't know. It's been eating at me for a couple of weeks. And so I just needed to re-record it and get it out of the way. So looking at 3 stories this week of some hijackers, attempted hijackings, all that kind of stuff, just around planes, right? Because I don't know if you realize this or not, but in the 60s and the 70s, it was just the trendy thing to do. It was super easy to just walk into an airport, right? You didn't have to park way out. You didn't have to go through a security line. Anybody could just walk in and go eat at the Cinnabon or something. I don't know. But you can just walk in and you can just get a ticket to wherever the planes were going that day and just fly out. And then some nefarious people realize oh, we could actually do a lot of damage and really get some attention just taking these things. And so from the 60s, mostly in the late 60s and the 70s, in a little bit into the 80s, just a lot of hijackings of commercial airplanes going on. And so this week we're looking at 3 stories from that era. We're looking at the Oufkir Coup, which wasn't really a full hijacking, but still involved just people being all willy-nilly with planes. We're also going to look at the story of Garrett Brock Trapnell. And then our first story after the fancy music is of Raffaele Minichiello. Story time. Raffaele Minichiello. I got to do it that way. That's the only way I can say it properly with an Italian name. Raffaele Minichiello. He was an Italian immigrant who grew up in Seattle before being drafted to Vietnam, and he actually ended up earning a Purple Heart while in combat during the Vietnam War. But upon returning to Camp Pendleton in California, where he was stationed, Minichiello, here we go. He came to believe that his unit had actually shorted him $200 off of his paycheck. And even today, if my paycheck's $200 short, I'm going to notice and it's going to hurt a little bit. Back in 1969, when this happened, you better believe people were paying attention to that. And so Raphael, instead of going to HR or whoever's in charge of that sort of thing, maybe hey, just notice that my paycheck's a little short. Just wanting to see what's up there, see if we can get this resolved. No, instead, he decides to break into the barracks one night and steal exactly $200 worth of radios and watches, because that's reasonable. He was quickly caught and then court-martialed for that theft. And again, Raphael, he's got a choice to make. He can either go to his court hearing and, just be all right, yes, I know, I realize I was poor, time of judgment on my behalf. Should have gone through the appropriate channels. That's my bad. I will take my demotion in rank or fine or whatever he's going to be doing. But no, he does not do that. Instead, he did the next best thing that he could think of, which was hijack a plane and flee the country. And so on October 31st, 1969, Raphael walked into Los Angeles International Airport with a bag containing a disassembled M1 rifle and 250 rounds of ammunition. And remember, this is before there's any kind of security lines. There's no TSA, none of that. You could just walk in with your bag full of whatever silliness you could think to pack and just walk right in. And so, which is insane that anybody would think that that's okay nowadays, but whatever. He buys a ticket for TWA Flight 85 to San Francisco. Now, also, if you're trying to flee the country, again, you probably want to find a flight that's going, I don't know, out of the country. Like, I don't know. And maybe, look, it's the 60s. Maybe there's not a lot of international flights out of Los Angeles, just given where it is geographically. You probably got to make a couple of connections. But I don't know. There's probably flights to Canada. He could have flown to like Vancouver or something. I don't know. Maybe Mexico. Mexico would have been a great option. Could have gone to Mexico City, Tijuana, something. I don't know, but no. Gets TWA Flight 85 to San Francisco. He boards the plane, takes a couple of shots of Canadian Club whiskey, and then while the plane is in flight, gets up, takes his bag to the bathroom, starts assembling his gun. Once he's done, he emerges, points the gun at the first stewardess that he sees, and demands that the plane be rerouted to New York, right? Now, again, huge problem with that because the plane, it's a shorter flight. And I mean, Los Angeles to San Francisco is probably a couple of hours, right? Need a lot more fuel to get from Los Angeles to New York than you would Los Angeles to San Francisco. So again, still did not think this through. But again, this is kind of common, shockingly common occurrence at this point in history. And so the crew immediately gives in and changes course. And so they start flying east. However, again, they don't have enough fuel. So they stop in Denver to refuel. And at that point, Raffaele lets all of the passengers off, keeps the flight crew, and then tells them that he's ultimately needs them to take him to Italy. So not just because it's his home country, but according to him, it was the only place on earth that would understand why hijacking a plane justified being slighted $200. And I get it. Like, my experience with most Italians, that checks out, right? And again, like, granted, I've never been to Italy, but like most of my experience with Italians is like people from New Jersey and New York. And again, not all Italians are like this, not all of them, but most of them pretty loud and obnoxious and just get angry over everything, right? And that's just how they communicate. So that doesn't surprise me where it's like, hey, what do you got to charge the $200? Yeah, what are you going to do? I shut up. I don't know. What do you think I should do? I think you should hijack a plane and travel across the world. Come down to Italy. We take care of you. It's not a big deal. $200 is insane. That's a very bad thing. It's almost like what's his name? Mussolini. That's the bad guy. We need to kill him. And then we did. And then everything in Italy is okay except we all eat the pasta, be very loud and very angry. That made no sense at all. And I realized that. But that's also just Italians. So they stop for fuel in they stop for fuel in Denver. They fly to New York. They land at JFK to refuel again. Because again, this is the 1960s. Planes don't have the same fuel capacity that planes today have. So the FBI, by this point, had been made aware that a plane had been hijacked. They meet the plane at the gate at JFK and try to start negotiating with Raffaele to try to like, hey, come on, dude. Like, don't worry about it. Let's just not do any of this right now. But instead, Raffaele fired a shot into the roof of the fuselage, which is, again, terrible idea. And I don't know, maybe it didn't go through the plane and tear a hole in it because, again, that would just depressurize the plane and just and again, there wasn't any passengers on board at this point, and maybe him and the stewardess and all the pilots are just in the cockpit the whole time. I don't know. But again, not a smart decision on his part. But when he did fire the shot, the FBI decided to back off and let them leave. And so after additional fueling stops in Bangor, Maine and Shannon, Ireland, Raffaele Minichiello landed in Rome. Like, he has done it. This dude has somehow found a way to stop at 4 other airports along the way to refuel without any issue. And he gets to Rome. He has successfully hijacked a plane, essentially flown it all the way around the world, halfway around the world, from Los Angeles to Rome. And he gets off. Italian police try to capture him, but then he takes an officer hostage and steals his police car. The police work in this story, got to be some of the worst I've ever seen. And I've covered a lot of serial killers with terrible police work, but this is comical. This is action comedy level police work, right? He takes a police officer hostage, steals his car, and then finally, a couple of days later, on November 2nd, he is arrested out in the Italian countryside at a church. Now, by this point, Raffaele Minichiello had made national headlines, world headlines, honestly. And because of that, his mugshot had been plastered all over the paper. And as women did, and still probably do today, just so many shallow, narrow-minded, short-sighted women swooned over this guy, this international felon, because, and look, he's a handsome guy. You can look for pictures of him. He's got just the real strong jawline. He's got piercing brown eyes, got a real heavy, solid chin, and just that classic 1960s, 1970s, just mop of hair. Just real handsome dude. I'll give him credit. I can admit it. All right. I get it. But also, he's a felon. He is a criminal. And yet, it's Italy. They don't care about that. And here's the thing. The U.S. authorities wanted Italy to extradite him back, but the Italian authorities refused to do so. And so he only went to trial for weapons possession in Italy. He was convicted, sentenced to 18 months in jail. But after he was released, he actually starred in a movie in Italy, and then made enough money off of that and like his other appearances to retire to a comfortable life out in the Italian countryside. And that's completely insane to me how he was able to do that. Our next story here starts with General Mohammed Oufkir, who was a high-ranking Moroccan military officer who had actually served in World War II for the French army. He had won all kinds of French honors and distinctions for, quote, legendary bravery during World War II. And by the 1960s, he had become the right-hand man to King Hassan II of Morocco. Oufkir oversaw the government supervision of politicians, unionists, and religious leaders to make sure that everything was cool, which, if you know anything about African history, nothing was ever cool because African governments tend to have just the most difficult time with everything, right? There's always someone trying to overthrow someone else. And the reason is because Africans natively did things structurally and fundamentally very different than white people did, right? Like white people government works for white people and Europeans and all that. The concept and the structure did not really work at all for the Africans because there are so many more tribes that you can't group these tribes into a country with boundaries like you could with Europeans, right? Because all of these tribes, they didn't want to work together at all and didn't have any, desire to join together or anything like that. It's not like the early, like pre-medieval Europeans where you got Anglos and Saxons, Gauls, Goths, barbarians, Huguenots, all these people. Like they all eventually like morphed together because it was just like, yeah, this is advantageous for us. Let's just all go. It's not like that at all in Africa. These tribes are very, very localized, very isolated. They do not like each other. They may be friendly here and there with some, but in general, each tribe has their own little spot, and that's all they care about. And so when you have these white people and these colonists coming in to try to establish white governments, they're forcing a lot of these tribes together. And so when ultimately one person becomes the governor or the president or the ruler of the country, that person belongs to a specific tribe. And a lot of the other ethnic tribes in that country don't like that because it's not their guy. And so that's why there's a lot of this civil war happening, all kinds of infighting and political corruption and all that kind of stuff, because white people ruined everything. So I know it's a sidebar, but hopefully that gives you some explanation, some context for why Africa is the way it is. So Oufkir, back to the regular story. Muhammad Oufkir, he had this habit of suppressing constant protests with police and military force. And then any notable figure, any rebel leader or anything who opposed King Hassan's authority either just mysteriously disappeared or was just outright murdered, right? Like, it's just like kind of the way that Russia operates. Like, any high profile figure that kind of starts to get outspoken about Putin or any other Russian leader or Russian ideology, they disappear or they die or whatever, especially if they've showed up in another country seeking asylum or whatever. The most famous example of this in Morocco was that of Mehdi Ben Barka, who was a revolutionist who advocated for communism and supported Cuba's revolution in the 60s. However, in 1965, Barka was abducted by French police and then was never seen again. Some conspiracy theorists insist that the CIA was actually involved in this abduction, since the CIA tended to have a lot of interest in anyone supporting communism in those days. But many people, including the French government, believe that Oufkir was behind the abduction and Ben Barka's murder. Well, on July 10th, 1971, General Mohammed Medbou led a group of rebels into Morocco's royal military, led a group of rebels who were in Morocco's royal military to Hassan's summer palace in Shikrat. Additionally, other rebel groups that had formed were then sent to Rabat, a city a few miles south, to seize several strategic locations in order to start their own republic, right? It's just another coup, another rebellion that had popped up, and it's in action, and they're starting it up again. That evening, 1,200 rebels stormed King Hassan's palace, completely surprising the 800 government members who were there as part of Hassan's birthday party. And as the rebels began firing on the unsuspecting party, Hassan, along with his family and Oufkir, escaped to a bathroom to call for help. Within hours, Hassan's troops had responded. They stormed the palace and then restored him back to power. And at the end of the day, 92 people were killed and another 133 people were injured, but the coup ultimately failed. And following that failed coup, Oufkir was named the new Minister of Defense on top of already being the Minister of the Interior. So now he's got even more power. At this point, like, he was literally just outside of the title. He was pretty much ruling all of Morocco. And so he has more power than he knows what to do with. And over the next year, Oufkir started to believe that he should probably just go ahead and be named the king, since he was already ruling everything. And he started to form a plan to stage his own coup and kind of do it the right way versus the terrible ways that everybody else had been doing it. So on August 16th, 1972, King Hassan was traveling back to Morocco from a visit to France. And as the plane traveled over the Mediterranean Sea, Oufkir set his coup into motion. He sent out 4 F-5 fighter jets from the Moroccan Air Force to intercept King Hassan's plane. And then once the plane was in sight, everything was full go, right? The jets began firing on King Hassan's plane with their machine guns, but nothing was actually happening. Like, it looked like they were supposed to be hitting a direct hit, but nothing was happening. And that's when they realized that their guns were full of practice ammo, full of blanks, because obviously that's not something you would think to check when you set out to go assassinate the king. You don't want to just, I don't know, man, I know we've been doing these planes for training missions, but now we're going to go assassinate the king. It's probably fine. No, full of blanks. Another one of the planes broke off from the formation and began firing on a nearby airfield to try to prevent the king from scrambling his jets again to go get him. But again, nothing was happening. And so another jet, after realizing that their planes were full of blanks, decided to go full kamikaze and ram his jet into the Boeing 727 that King Hassan was traveling in. And here's what's crazy to me about this. This pilot, gets King Hassan's plane in his sight. He's going to just crash his plane into it. The dude misses. And I get that each of these planes are traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. But I think for you to try to hit your plane with another plane and miss takes more skill than actually hitting the plane in the first place. But King Hassan, he sees this happen, sees the plane miss him, and then all of a sudden a voice from the King's plane comes over the radio. It says, "Stop firing, the tyrant is dead." And it didn't matter that the voice on the radio sounded eerily similar to the King's, because that's exactly who it was. It didn't matter that the plane literally had no damage to it from the blank, because, the jets were firing blanks at it. The pilots believed it. And they were like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess we did do something. Okay, cool." And they broke off. And by the time the King landed, he had all of the rebels arrested. And Oufkir himself was later found with 5 bullet wounds, having been assassinated by another loyalist to the King. So Oufkir's coup did not work as well, but it was just really, really silly. Our final story here, another insane story of Garrett Brock Trapnell, who was born on January 31st, 1938 in Brockton, Massachusetts. But his childhood doesn't really matter. I don't know. I guess it's just how you start a story. You just let them know when people are born. I don't get it personally, but that's just how we do it as a species. We start with the day they were born. Trapnell's story itself does not truly begin until January 28th, 1972, when he walked into Los Angeles International Airport wearing a cast on his arm where he was concealing a .45 caliber pistol. He boarded TWA Flight 2 to New York and waited until the plane was over Chicago before starting his hijacking. And just as a side note here, what was going on with TWA at this time? Because I think also DB Cooper's hijacking took place around this time. And I do believe he was also a TWA flight. I think there were other TWA flights that were hijacked or crashed during this time. No question as to why they're no longer around. I don't know. I don't know if it was I don't know if they were like the Spirit Air of the 1960s and 70s, where it was just no one cared at all, or what. But man, TWA, just unfortunate that they were the ones that got targeted in all of this. But anyway, as Trapnell's plane was flying over Chicago, he hijacked the plane and demanded $306,800, which seems like a very random number. And I get that. Because, why not just say 300,000 or 400,000 or 500,000? Nice round number. But no, $306,800 just so happened to be the amount that Trapnell had lost in a recent court case. So he's taking the Raffaele Minichiello line of logic here when it comes to, trying to right wrongs. Instead of trying to figure out how he's going to come up with that money. I don't know if he thought of anything else before that, but he just goes to hijack a plane and demand it from the government without thinking about the possible repercussions of doing such a thing, but whatever. He also demanded the release of Angela Davis, a communist activist who orchestrated an armed takeover of the Marin County, California courthouse in 1970. And then, because he figured he was going to be in a lot of trouble for all of this, he also demanded a formal pardon from President Richard Nixon, which, again, if you know anything about Richard Nixon, is not going to do that at all. So another thing is, communist activists, right? Their idea of communism, everyone works together. Everyone lives in harmony. We all contribute. Everyone lives the same way. And then they go and do crazy stuff like this, where it's we're going to hijack a plane to get our point across. Down with the capitalists. It's just the wrong way to go about doing it. So anyway, the plane finally lands in New York, which also good for Trapnell for actually booking a cross-country flight to get, to try to hijack, his way into things, unlike Minichiello, but whatever. Once the plane landed in New York, the FBI jumped on board and shot Trapnell, actually, which didn't kill him, just injured him enough to prevent him from escaping. At that point, finally, the Federal Aviation Administration decided that it needed to perform an overhaul of its safety measures. All right. So Garrett Brock Trapnell, we can thank for a lot of the first iterations of airport security measures. What's crazy about this is that it took 13 separate domestic hijackings, not to mention nearly 40 total hijackings across the world since the 1950s, for the FAA to finally do something about it. But whatever, that's beside the point. Garrett Trapnell finally got them to take action. 13 domestic hijackings before the FAA was like, God, maybe we should do something about this. Oh, man. Anyway. Even then, even after the FAA continued to, started implementing security measures, the number of airplane hijackings continued to rise in the 1970s and 80s, and then finally leveled off and came to a stop towards the end of the 80s. But still, just absolutely nuts. Well, at Trapnell's trial, he tried to plead insanity by arguing that he suffered from multiple personality disorder and that the hijacking was done by one of his alter egos named Greg Ross. However, this is so crazy to me. That argument was quickly shut down when the prosecuting attorney produced a video of Trapnell openly bragging to a journalist about how good he was at faking insanity. Oh, I wish I could find that video, because that's got to be real good. This is like, so Mr. Trapnell, how are you planning to defend yourself from this hijacking case? Well, check this out, dude. I'm really good at faking being crazy, right? Like, I can say that I've got multiple personality disorder, right? So like right now you're talking to Garrett Trapnell, but now my name is Gregory Ross. And I am the hijacker of the flying machine, because there are injustices in the world. I'm crazy. See, man, I'm crazy. I'm crazy. I got multiple personalities now. Anyway, so it's just... Oh, so despite that clear evidence that he wasn't crazy, along with all of the evidence proving that Trapnell actually hijacked the plane, the trial still somehow ended in a hung jury. I don't know how that happens, but he ended up getting a retrial and was ultimately convicted 4 months later and was sentenced to life in prison at a federal supermax prison in Illinois. And you would think that that's where this story ends, but no, it keeps going, because of course it does. On May 24th, 1978, Barbara Ann Oswald, who just so happened to be one of Trapnell's 6 wives that he simultaneously maintained. I don't know how that's even legally possible. Even just out of prison, you can't simultaneously maintain 6 wives, but then you do it in prison where I don't know, maybe they were just like, he's already in for life, we're not even going to bother with it. But one of his 6 wives, Barbara, hijacked a charter helicopter in St. Louis and then forced the pilot to fly over to Illinois and land in the prison yard. Now, the pilot of this helicopter, Alan Barklage, as he tried to land the aircraft, Barbara, I guess, stopped paying attention for just a second. So Barklage tried to wrestle the gun away from her, ended up shooting her, killing her, and then finally landed, tells police what was going on, and investigators finally figured everything out. Trapnell was punished and placed in solitary confinement. And again, the story's not over. Later that year, on December 21st, 1978, Robin Oswald, who was Barbara's 17-year-old daughter and then thereby stepdaughter of Garrett Trapnell, hijacked TWA Flight 541 because apparently TWA just let anybody take over their operation at any time. Like, that's probably their safety demonstration, right? It's just like, all right, ladies and gentlemen, your seat covers can be used as a flotation device. If the oxygen masks come down, please affix them over to your face first before helping anyone else. And also, if anyone else would just like to take a crack at flying this airplane, just wave a gun in the air. We'll come to you and escort you to the cockpit. Like, what are they doing over there? But there's three TWA hijackings in the same episode. And there's so many more along the way. Robin, 17-year-old, also to have a 17-year-old girl hijack a plane, clearly no one cares right now. Like, the flight attendants just like, pilot, we got another one. All right, just send them back. You know, it's just, I don't know what's going on. But Robin demanded Trapnell's release because it had worked out so well for her mother. But she said that if authorities refused to release him, that she would detonate a pack of dynamite that she had strapped to her body and take the entire plane down. Over the next couple of hours, the FBI negotiators worked to land the plane and free the hostages. They eventually convinced Robin not to detonate the dynamite, which ultimately wouldn't have happened anyway because Robin's quote unquote dynamite was just a set of railroad flares taped to a doorbell. So now even just TWA flight attendants, and I guess TWA passengers in general, have no idea what dynamite looks like, which, I mean, I don't know, maybe a railroad flare and a dynamite stick probably looks similar, but then just to affix a doorbell to it, I don't know. Maybe it was convincing at the time. I don't know. Who am I to judge? But Barbara was arrested and taken off to prison. And at that point, I do believe, well, as far as I know, Trapnell never tried to hijack or organize another hijacking again. And then he died in prison on September 7th, 1993. All right, there you go. Hijacker Hijinks in the books. And I think this episode turned out a little bit better than the original recording. I don't know. Something about it just really, really bothered me. And I just needed to re-record it. Otherwise, it was going to drive me insane. But we're on the home stretch now. Let's see what we learned today. What did we learn? Number one, TWA Airlines. What are you doing? I mean, good Lord. Like, here's a quick rundown. Not to mention the 3 TWA flights that were hijacked in this episode. But then you had Flight 840 from Rome, Italy to Athens, Greece, who was hijacked and forcibly diverted to Damascus, Syria. Yeah. Flight 741 was hijacked after taking off from Frankfurt, Germany, en route to New York City. It was taken to Jordan along with 2 other hijacked airplanes. Flight 106 was hijacked by the Republic of the New Africa, which was en route from Albuquerque to Havana. The plane was stopped in Tampa, Florida. Flight 841, which was from Tel Aviv to New York City, was bombed. There was a bomb that was placed in the cargo hold that crashed into the Ionian Sea and killed all 88 people on board. Flight 355 was hijacked by 5 Croatian separatists on a flight from LaGuardia to O'Hare. They instead rerouted the plane to Montreal and then made a couple of other refueling stops, dropped off some propaganda, and then the hijackers eventually surrendered in Paris. And then Flight 847 from Athens to Rome was hijacked, first sent to Lebanon and then to Algeria by another terrorist group. And then Flight 840, a bomb exploded on the plane's approach to Athens, Greece. A few people died there. And then probably the most famous one that most people know of is Flight 800, which was flying from New York to Paris when it exploded over the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 230 people on board. So just like TWA, like no wonder they're not around anymore, right? Anyway, that was a big number one. Number two, apparently Italians think it's perfectly okay to hijack a plane and fly it across the world just because they got shorted $200. And then number three, if your hijacking fails, don't get one of your 6 wives to hijack another plane, and then don't get her daughter to hijack another plane to try to get you out. It's just not going to work. Next week on Our Weird World, it is the start of a new month, which means it's another weird fun bag episode. It is number 7, where we are going to be talking about atomic wedgies, a serial killer named Very Idham in Hijinks, and then we're also going to talk about hollow earth theory. Because if you think flat earth theory is really dumb, then you're going to get a kick out of hollow earth theory and all of the people who tried to prove that that was a thing. So thank you all for listening. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird. Well, I ain't ever been the Barbie doll type. No, I can't swig that sweet champagne. I'd rather drink beer all night. Champagne's not even sweet. In a tavern or in a honky-tonk or on a 4-wheel drive tailgate. I've got posters on my wall of Skinnerd, Kid, and Straight. Some people look down on me, but I don't give a rip. I'll stand barefooted in my own front yard with a baby on my hip. Victoria's Secret, well, their stuff's real nice. Oh, but I can buy the same thing on a Walmart shelf half price and still look sexy, just as sexy as those models on TV. No, I don't need no designer tag to make my man want me. You might think I'm trashy, a little too hardcore, but in my neck of the woods, I'm just the girl next door. 'Cause I'm a redneck woman. I ain't no high-class broad. I'm just a product of my raising. I say, hey, y'all, and yee-haw. And I keep my Christmas lights on my front porch all year long. And I know all the words to every Tanya Tucker song. So here's to all my sisters out there keeping it country. Let me get a big hell yeah from the redneck girls like me.